Imagine this. Take Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Saudi Aramco, and Nvidia, all combined at today's valuations. Even then, you would not reach half the value of a company founded 400 years ago. This company fundamentally changed the world. Yet very few people know its name, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. Let's go back to the 1580s. Spain had taken control of Portugal and turned into a terrifying naval superpower. The Dutch, meanwhile, were still fighting for independence from Spain. They were vastly outnumbered, so they invented a new weapon: private capital. In 1602, 7 small companies merged into a single giant entity, the VOC. But this was not just a trading company. It had armed ships, a private army, and fortresses around the world. Yet its most revolutionary innovation was its shares. For the first time, an ordinary Dutch citizen, a shopkeeper, a carpenter, could invest their own money into building an empire and profit from it. The VOC grew without collecting taxes like a king, relying solely on capital raised from the market. Wealth was no longer created through land, but through markets. Merchants ran this machine. But to keep it anchored, another power was needed. That power was a famous family with no kingdom of its own, the House of Orange-Nassau. They were in a difficult position within this new order. Amsterdam's merchant elite wanted a stronger republic. Spain wanted their bloodline wiped out. They had no lands to rule. They faced extinction or adaptation. They chose the only thing left to them: capital. The House of Orange-Nassau did not manage the VOC, but they financed it. More importantly, they tied their future to the company. This was not merely symbolic. In a merchant republic where noble titles no longer guaranteed power, their involvement gave them a strategic advantage. The VOC did not act like a normal business. It behaved like a sovereign state. When your market capitalization eclipses the GDP of nations, when your private armies defeat military powers, you are no longer just a company. You are an empire in your own right. At its peak, the VOC's modern equivalent value was $7.9 trillion. For comparison, today's most valuable company, Nvidia, is worth roughly half of that. From the early 1600s to the mid-1700s, over 1 million people sailed from the Netherlands to Asia. They were not just adventurers, they were employees of a massive corporation. This scale did not emerge in isolation. The VOC's success rested on 3 pillars: a powerful state charter, Amsterdam's financial elite, and the strategy of the House of Orange. The charter was more than a trade license. It resembled a royal decree. The company could sign international treaties, raise armies, seize territory, and govern colonies. Its actions carried the weight of a national flag, even though the seal came from a corporate boardroom. The VOC established itself in Java, Sumatra, and India. In 1619, they captured Jakarta and renamed it Batavia. This was not merely a name change. Batavia became the center of gravity in Asia. Dutch culture, architecture, and cuisine in Indonesia trace back to this hub. But such ambition required more than vision. It required serious capital. Instead of depending on kings or short-term loans, they created something new. A system where ordinary citizens could invest in a company and remain invested over time. In August 1602, the VOC opened itself to the public. For the first time in human history, a company offered its future to ordinary people through the world's first IPO. As soon as shares were issued, capital began to flow. This raised a larger question. What kind of force could persuade rival powerful families to set aside differences and work together for a greater future? Once again, the answer led back to the House of Orange-Nassau. They supported this transformation, but they were also deeply dependent on it. Domestically, political winds were unstable. Abroad, the situation was explosive. Spain considered Dutch independence a crime punishable by fire. Under such pressure, feudalism offered no solutions. The House of Orange had no peasants, no silver mines, no divine right. But they had one winning idea: rule through markets, not through thrones. This was revolutionary. They chose to build an entirely new power base beyond land and precious metals, financial institutions where risk could be calculated. At the core were permanent shares. For the first time, ownership in a global enterprise could be freely transferred. This gave birth to the world's first secondary market, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. Innovation did not stop there. Merchants went further. They didn't just buy shares, they bet on what those shares would be worth tomorrow. They created speculation and arbitrage markets. In effect, they invented nearly every tool Wall Street uses today. But behind markets and mathematics lay another force: FOMO, fear of missing out. VOC shares became one of history's first major FOMO events. The share price rose from 100 in 1602 to nearly 1,000 by 1720, a tenfold increase. Building a global empire on public money was risky. What if ships sank? What if trade failed? The Dutch answered this fear with a legal breakthrough that permanently changed investing: limited liability. If a ship sank or a trade route failed, investors lost only what they had invested. Their personal property remained safe. Their families were protected. Suddenly, people were far more willing to invest. This is the same principle we use today to separate personal assets from business risk. The VOC also printed sealed, signed, freely tradable physical share certificates. Ownership could now move from hand to hand, city to city, without royal approval or family inheritance. This was revolutionary. Dutch financial influence did not remain confined to the Netherlands. It crossed borders, reshaping Britain and later America. These ideas and institutions traveled, especially through William of Orange. In 1688, England faced political crisis. King James II had lost the trust of Parliament and the people. English leaders turned to anyone Protestant with a claim to the throne. They soon reached out to Mary, James's daughter, who was married to William of Orange. William arrived in England with troops and a mindset forged in the Dutch Republic, a mindset that merged capital with governance. He did not see markets as a threat to power, but as a tool to support it. This culminated in what history remembers as the Glorious Revolution. Under William's rule, England founded the Bank of England, introduced government bonds, and financed wars through capital markets. These were Dutch innovations written into British law. The story goes back even further. In 1609, the ship Half Moon, sailing under the VOC flag, reached the harbor now known as New York. In 1624, the Dutch West India Company founded New Amsterdam at the southern tip of modern Manhattan. It appeared to be a simple trading post, but its design told a different story. Organized streets, robust trade networks, diverse communities. The Dutch were shaping something rare, a commercial hub on its way to becoming the financial center of the New World. In 1664, the British seized it and renamed it New York. But they did not erase it. They kept much of the Dutch structure, legal systems, and financial practices because they worked. These systems blended into British governance and quietly endured. By the 1700s, the financial elites of Amsterdam and London were working in alignment. Amsterdam's bank-based finance collaborated closely with London's market-based system. Together, they formed a new economic advantage. Dutch reliability merged with British innovation. This fusion did not remain in Europe. Through shared colonial ties, especially New Amsterdam's Dutch roots and later British control, these financial ideas traveled west. New York inherited legal frameworks and credit customs from Amsterdam and London. This shared DNA quietly laid the foundation. Over time, these foundations transformed a port city into a financial engine. Not overnight, but through decades of shared history. New York absorbed the tools that once empowered Europe's financial centers and eventually built its own version. The VOC was revolutionary. It permanently changed trade, corporate finance, and state power. But even giants have limits. By the late 1700s, cracks began to appear. The company that ruled the seas began sinking under the weight of its own ambition. Power grew rapidly, but control could not keep pace. Corruption seeped in. Internal divisions deepened. Rising military costs and competition with Britain and France left the VOC surrounded. By 1795, the VOC was no longer powerful. The Dutch government took control and nationalized it. Founded in 1602 with a 21-year trade monopoly in Asia, the company ceased operations when taken over by the state in 1796. Yet while the empire collapsed, its architecture of power endured. Instead of disappearing, VOC ideas evolved into modern finance, legal frameworks, and the multinational models we still rely on today. This legacy is visible in modern Netherlands. The country is no longer a maritime empire. It is a financial one. Its influence is felt in boardrooms, contracts, and offshore accounts. The Netherlands consistently ranks among the world's most competitive industrial economies. It is a magnet for global capital, attracting businesses from every continent, especially the United States. Dutch foreign assets now exceed $3.5 trillion, an astonishing footprint for a country with fewer people than California. Behind this vast capital network, one family still casts a long shadow, the House of Orange-Nassau. They still rule. The crown may be ceremonial, but their connections are not. From defense to energy to corporate governance, the royal family remains deeply intertwined with Dutch industry. They quietly hold stakes in companies like Shell and preserve wealth through funds and investment vehicles. They continue to help shape one of the world's most powerful corporate forces. In 1907, a new giant emerged. Royal Dutch merged with Shell Transport and Trading Company to form Royal Dutch Shell. Once again, a Dutch company carried not only capital, but a royal title. Shell was not alone. ING Group remains one of Europe's most powerful financial institutions, with roots tracing back to the Netherlands. Built through mergers in the late 20th century, its rise reflects enduring Dutch influence. This multinational entity still relies on Dutch corporate architecture and legal protections rooted in the VOC era. Without the VOC and its long shadow, both the Netherlands and the world would look very different today. Generations of merchants and financiers connected to the VOC now hold stakes in modern corporate giants. Some sit quietly on boards, others shape policy through funds and capital networks. Their surnames rarely make headlines, but their strategies span oil, banking, and logistics. When we think of capitalism, we often recall names like Rothschild, Rockefeller, or J.P. Morgan. But they did not invent the capitalist model. They followed it. Long before them stood the House of Orange, and they were largely responsible for building the capitalist blueprint. They designed a system where war, trade, and finance moved together. This video has focused heavily on the VOC's financial innovations and contributions, but it is crucial to acknowledge the atrocities they committed, especially during their expansion in Asia. These included massacres, violence against indigenous populations, and exploitation of resources and people. Examples include the Banda Islands Massacre, the Ambon Massacre, and the Batavia Massacre. They relied heavily on forced labor and coercion, especially in spice-producing regions. They routinely used violence to suppress resistance and maintain control over trade routes and resources. This included military campaigns against local populations and the dismantling of indigenous political systems. So yes, they gave much to modern finance, many good things. But it is essential to keep perspective. From the rise of the VOC to the dominance of Royal Dutch Shell, a clear pattern emerges. Power and capital are inseparable, and the House of Orange understood this very early. Capital could be more powerful than crowns. They transformed trade into a corporate-state hybrid and scaled that model across centuries and continents. They left behind a legacy that defines how global money is managed today. The Netherlands no longer rules the seas, but Dutch capital now crosses borders, exerting more influence than fleets ever could. And this brings us to a question that remains deeply relevant today. If markets now wield the kind of power once reserved for kings, then who controls the markets? When the crown becomes invisible, who holds it?